Most of us know at least one person in our lives who's a psychopath, though we might be completely unaware of that fact. When we think of psychopaths, we imagine them to be manipulative, violent people. But the truth is that most people who are diagnosed with that condition manage to live normal lives, while others turn to a life of crime, using their lack of empathy to their advantage. Number 10. As a child, Gregorio Hernandez was diagnosed with encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain that's usually caused by an infection or allergic reaction. It's believed that this was a factor in who he would become later in his life, and today, he's known as the Tacuba Strangler. His parents would later state that he exhibited some very strange and worrying behavior while growing up, but they could never have imagined he would turn out to be a serial killer who would only be caught when he was 82 years old. While it's believed that this condition had an effect on his brain, it did not affect his performance in studies, and he was granted a scholarship from the Mexican state's oil and gas company, Petróleos Mexicanos. He attended at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, where he studied chemistry. He committed his crimes in the midst of the Second World War, the first of which took place on the 15th of August that year. He contacted a street worker named Maria Gonzalez, but she never left his house, as she was strangled and then buried in Hernandez's garden. This seemed to set something off in his mind, and over the next few weeks, he would carry out 2 more attacks against street workers. The first was a woman named Rosa Reyes. She was followed by Raquel Martinez de Leon. And after that, he ended the life of a fellow chemistry student named Graciela Arias Avalos, with whom he claimed to have fallen in love. It is possible that at that point he realized what he had done and that he was experiencing some deep-seated psychological problems, so he checked into a psychiatric hospital where he sought treatment, and in the meantime, Graciela had been reported as missing. And knowing that Hernandez had feelings for her, 4 detectives and a friend of her father's traveled to Hernandez's house to look for her. At first, they were unsuccessful, but they refused to leave without some answers. And after a few hours of searching on the property, they found 4 graves where he had buried his victims. He may have thought that he'd be safe in the psychiatric hospital, but Hernandez was quickly tracked down and arrested. He told investigators that as soon as he was anywhere near a woman, his normal personality would disappear, and he would turn into a monster. He spent 5 years in a psychiatric hospital and a further 29 in prison, but quite unbelievably, he accumulated a following among women who'd heard about his case. Some of these fans would offer to pay prison guards to allow them to see him for just a few minutes, but it isn't known if this was ever allowed. He was eventually pardoned in 1975, and after giving a speech at the Congress of Union, he was dubbed the national hero, since he was considered the epitome of rehabilitation by the state. He would go on to obtain a law degree and worked as a lawyer until his passing, which to the families of his victims could not come soon enough. Number 9. Kenneth Erskine started his life on the wrong side of the law, but his crimes would escalate to the point where he received 7 life sentences. He was born in Hammersmith, England in 1963, but he had a tough time as a child, as he was abandoned by his parents. Since he had mental development issues, he would spend many years in special education schools and started showing disturbing behavior from the age of about 12 when he tried to end one of his classmates' lives by attempting to drown him during a field trip. His behavior only worsened from there, and as time went by, he became ever more violent. He struggled to find work and eventually ended up sleeping in the streets, and out of desperation, he started breaking into houses. By the age of 24, he had the mental capacity of an 11-year-old, but he was smart enough to deposit money that he made from his burglaries into 10 different bank accounts. In April of 1987, though, his crimes would start to escalate. He entered the Wandsworth house of 78-year-old Aileen Ems, and before burglarizing her house, he ended her life via strangulation. But it was only established that she'd been attacked after her cleaner noticed that her television had been stolen, and the coroner's report had to be altered as he initially listed her passing as natural causes. On the 9th of June 1986, he attacked 67-year-old Janet Crockett in her apartment in Wandsworth. She was serving as the chairperson of the Tenants Association, so it didn't take long for her fellow tenants to notice her absence, and quite unbelievably, when she was found deceased, the cause of her passing was also recorded as being from natural causes. After it was determined that she had in fact been attacked, her apartment was processed, and Erskine's palm print was found inside. 3 weeks later, he ended the lives of 2 of the elderly in Stockwell. He would go on to attack and end the lives of 2 more elderly people in Fulham. He was eventually arrested after it was discovered that he was attempting to conceal his bank accounts, and the palm print found in Janet's apartment was determined to be his. A victim who managed to survive one of Erskine's attacks, 74-year-old Fred Prentice, identified him in a police lineup, and Fred stated that Erskine tried to end his life via strangulation while he was asleep in bed one night. Erskine was charged with 7 counts of murder, and in January of 1988, he was found guilty. Number 8. Martha Cannon, better known to her friends and family as Patty, was the wife of a farmer who lived near Reliance, Maryland in Sussex County. In 1826, her husband passed away, and she was left to manage the farm on her own. Their daughter's name remains unknown to history, but it's known that she, on 2 separate occasions, married men who were involved in the illegal slave trade, the first of which was Henry Brereton, a blacksmith who was eventually convicted of kidnapping, and who, after he escaped and was recaptured, was executed. Patty's daughter then married Joe Johnson, another career criminal and kidnapper of slaves, and it's believed that these 2 men influenced Patty into becoming the notorious and heinous criminal she eventually became. Patty and Johnson formed a gang that took advantage of the high prices that were paid for slaves. By 1808, it had become illegal for anyone to import slaves. But Patty and her gang ignored this law and would abduct free-living African-American residents in her area, after which they were transported to other areas in the South where they would receive as much as $1,000 per slave, which was a lot of money in that time. Once the victims were abducted, they'd be held in the basement of Patty's farmhouse before they were transported to plantations in other areas via covered wagons and a ferry. Before long, the gang gained a reputation for being extremely violent, and even the law was hesitant to do anything about their crimes. Hence, they were free to keep abducting people for years on end, and they made a hefty profit. There were some instances when it was decided that something had to be done, but as soon as the gang found out that the law was after them, they would simply cross state lines and continue their nefarious activities elsewhere. While being transported, their victims would be treated very badly, and one woman would later testify that she was kept in a tavern for 5 months before being eventually sold to a plantation owner, despite the fact that Patty knew she was a free woman. In 1822, their evasion of the law finally came to an end. Joe Johnson was one of the first members of the gang to be found guilty. He was sentenced to 39 lashes and had to spend time in the pillory, which would have caused him great embarrassment, much to the delight of his victims. Patty was somehow not charged, but her luck ran out when a farmer who was renting a piece of land from her in Delaware decided to plow a field. While doing so, he unearthed several shallow graves containing the remains of Patty's victims, and she was arrested. She was charged with ending the lives of 4 people, and some sources state that she was condemned to be executed, where others claim the trial never took place. But whatever the case may be, Patty passed away in her jail cell on the 11th of May, 1829, aged somewhere between 60 or 70 years old. Number 7. Like so many killers that came after him, Samuel Green had a difficult childhood. He grew up in Meredith in Belknap County, New Hampshire. And strangely, when he decided to abscond from school one day and was caught, his parents decided that he was possessed by a demon. From that day on, his childhood would never be the same, as he was routinely thrashed, and when he was caught stealing as a teenager, the abuse only got worse, which badly affected his mental state. Each time that he was punished in this way, he would lose his temper and lash out, earning him yet another bout of punishment. It was an endless cycle that would eventually see Green becoming one of America's first ever serial killers. When it became evident to Green's family that they could no longer handle him, he was sent to live with a man named Dunn in New Hampton. This seemed to calm him down, and his behavior seemed to improve, but it wouldn't last long, as he decided to skip school again and received more lashes as a result. He was then once again caught stealing, and after he was punished for this, he decided to return to his family. But upon his arrival there, his parents were so outraged that they beat him until he lost consciousness. He was sent back to Dunn, who was equally outraged, and he was beaten again for running away. This was the last straw in Green's book, and he decided to end Dunn's life. He used an axe and a pitchfork in the attack, but it was unsuccessful, and Dunn retaliated with another beating. But Green refused to accept his punishment, and he unsuccessfully tried to burn down Dunn's barn, which resulted in more punishment. Realizing that his life was a misery, Green left and fell in with a man named Ash, with whom he started distributing counterfeit money. He and Ash attempted to end the life of a schoolmaster during this time, but the man managed to survive, and they fled to Vermont, where Green decided to join the military. But when he was apprehended after going AWOL, he was beaten once again, and then he absconded to New Hampshire. He used the fake money to buy expensive clothes, a horse, jewelry, and proper food. But when he'd spent all of his counterfeit funds, he became a servant to several wealthy families, whom he then robbed in the dead of night. He and Ash met up again in Bath, and it was here that he ended the life of his first victim, a jewelry salesman, who they ambushed while he was riding on his mule. From this point on, Green made little effort to conceal his crimes, and he would rob and end the life of anyone who got in his way, or who he took an interest in. He was arrested several times, but there was never enough evidence to convict him, and he was always set free. He ended the lives of several men while robbing a jewelry store in Montreal, and this time he was arrested and sentenced to be executed. But he managed to escape from prison and went into hiding for a while before continuing his career as a criminal. The crimes he committed then resulted in Green being the first person ever to be labeled enemy number 1, and authorities launched a manhunt to capture him. His luck finally ran out when he stole $30 worth of items in a store in Danvers, Massachusetts, while intoxicated, and he was finally arrested. He was sentenced to 4 years behind bars, but ended up serving several more years for repeatedly trying to escape. Number 6. Edward Ruloff was a psychopath who lived during the latter part of the 19th century, and he was said to be extremely intelligent. These two characteristics earned him the nickname the Genius Killer, and he managed to evade the law for many years before he was finally apprehended. He was born in New Brunswick, Canada, in an area close to St. John in 1821, or thereabout. His mother had to look after him and his 2 brothers alone after their father passed away, and hence they struggled financially. Ruloff had always hoped to go to college once he completed high school, but since the family couldn't afford it, he decided to drop out of school at 16, and he started working in a dry goods store as a clerk. It was here that his life started to go down the wrong path. It came to the attention of his employers that some of the store's inventory was going missing, and when they started investigating, a series of fires was started to cover up the thefts. But Ruloff made one mistake. He was seen wearing a suit that was known to have been stolen from the store, and he was arrested. He was sent to prison for 2 years, after which he decided to relocate to the US. There, he started working on the Erie Canal and became friendly with a man named Will Shutt, who lived in Tompkins County. Ruloff moved in with Shutt in 1842, and he then used his intellect to land a job as a schoolmaster. His employers were impressed by his intellect, and before long he started studying towards becoming a doctor of herbal medicine. He married a woman named Harriet the following year, and 2 years later they had a daughter, but both Harriet and their daughter inexplicably disappeared. Whenever he was asked about their whereabouts, he would claim that they were traveling somewhere, but he could never specifically state where they were. Most people believed him since he was an intelligent man, but it would later come to light that he'd committed a horrible crime. He stated that one day he flew into a fit of rage during an argument, and he attacked his wife, ending her life. He then took her to a nearby lake after placing her in a chest and dropped it into the middle of the lake, where added weights ensured that it would stay beneath the water. Some historians believe that he sent their daughters to live with one of his brothers, but this was debatable. It's believed that he also ended the life of Schutt's wife a few weeks later, since he'd fallen ill and Schutt asked Ruloff to attend to her using his herbal remedies. While it was never proven, most historians believe he ended her life either by not treating them at all or by using his skills as a doctor of herbal medicine to poison her. When he was suspected of ending Harriet's life, he decided to flee, but he didn't get far before the authorities caught up with him. He was sentenced to 10 years behind bars, but he managed to escape with the aid of the warden's son, whom he'd been tutoring. Strangely, after he was tracked down, the charges against him were dropped, after it was argued that since Harriet was never found, there was no way of proving that she was deceased. He continued committing crimes and spent a few years in what's now Sing Sing prison. But while there, he formed a gang that would in 1870 rob a dry goods store, and they ended the life of a clerk. His accomplices were discovered deceased in a river in the area, and Ruloff was tracked down. He was convicted thanks to a shoe that he left behind at the crime scene, and he was executed. It's believed that he had many more victims than the ones we know about, but we may never learn the true extent of his crimes. Number 5. Karl Feigenbaum, a German-born man who's known to have ended the life of at least one person, may not be the most famous of psychopaths, but then again, he just might be, since it's been suggested by many historians that he may have been the infamous Jack the Ripper. While we know him as Karl Feigenbaum, this was likely not his real name, as he's known to have used several aliases throughout his life. But we do know that he was born in 1840, somewhere in southern Germany, and that he relocated to New York at some point. He stated that he had 2 sisters and a brother, and he may have been married and had children at some point, but this remains speculation. For at least part of his life, he worked as a sailor, and it's believed that he left that trade sometime between 1890 and 1892. He then traveled to New York, where he settled, but historians have no idea what he did for work. He started renting a room from a widow named Juliana Hoffman and her son Michael, who lived above a store on 544 East 6th Street. It's believed that they only rented the room to him since they were in serious financial trouble. Michael did his best to make some money for them to live on after they immigrated to the US from Budapest, but he was paid a pittance, and so they decided to look for a lodger. Feigenbaum spotted the sign that they'd put up in the store window, and after sleeping on the street for a while, he decided to rent the room. He started living there on the 29th of August, 1894, after stating that he was starting a new job at a florist's and would pay $1 a week with 8 cents added on if he wanted breakfast. But 2 days later, Feigenbaum's true nature would reveal itself. He and the Hoffmans had spent some time talking in the front room of the apartment, and at around 10 p.m., he went to bed. Juliana and Michael both slept in the front room, and just after midnight, Michael awoke to the sounds of his mother screaming. He realized that Feigenbaum was attacking her with a sharpened blade, and after realizing that he could do nothing to help her, he escaped through a window. He ended Juliana's life, after which he made his escape by climbing out of his room window onto the roof of a shed and into an alleyway. He even managed to wash his hands at a water pump in the street, but he was beset upon by the gathering crowd who'd heard Michael's cries for help and then taken into custody. It would come to light that Feigenbaum had seen Juliana get some change from her purse in a closet, and that he'd stolen some of the money before ending her life. This shows how little regard he had for human life, as he had no issue ending someone's life for some spare change. But at his trial, he claimed that the police had arrested the wrong man, and that a friend of his, Jacob Weibel, was responsible. He claimed that he and Weibel had been friends for a while, and that his friend would sneak into his room at night so that they didn't have to pay extra. He then ended Juliana's life while everyone else slept, and disappeared when Michael started calling for aid. He expressed his remorse for bringing Weibel into the Hoffman's house, but his claims fell on deaf ears. He was sentenced to be executed, and this was done at Sing Sing prison on the 27th of April, 1896. Number 4. The crimes committed by Stephen Hobbs are believed to stretch all the way back to 2002, though some people have speculated he may have started committing them in 1996, but he was only apprehended in 2011. Not much information is available on Hobbs' childhood, but it is known that he was born in Crosby, Texas in 1971. As a child, he didn't socialize much with other children, and after completing his studies at college, he started working as a security guard in Houston. He was married, had 2 children, and until his arrest in 2001, he had no run-ins with the law except for a traffic violation that he committed in 2000. The first of his serious crimes may have been committed in 1996, but the authorities know with certainty that he carried out an attack in August of 2002. During that incident, he'd been driving around the streets of Houston and at one point approached a street worker, whom he then assaulted close to the Beaumont Highway. He then ended her life and fled, leaving her to be discovered the next day. Next, he ended the life of 38-year-old Patricia Ann Pyatt, who was living in Crosby. Hobbs managed to gain entry into her house, where he abducted her and forced her into his car. He then took her to an area close to the Beaumont Highway Bridge, where he ended her life. He may have carried out further attacks, but this was never proven, and it's only known that in 2011, he carried out his next crime. He met up with a street worker named Sandra Gunter, whom he assaulted, and shortly after ended the life of Sarah Annette Sanford, who was found deceased a short distance from his home. 3 more street workers would come forward to accuse him of assault and threats against their lives in 2011. And another victim was found by chance when a Pasadena police officer stopped by the side of a road to set up his speed camera. And there he found the remains of 57-year-old Wanda Trombley, who was also a street worker. Further inquiries were made, and several street workers from the area stated that a large man with red hair had assaulted them. They added that he was wearing a security guard uniform, and it was then that Hobbs would start closing in around him. All security guards working in the county were asked to submit their DNA for testing, and Hobbs came back as a positive match for DNA found at 2 of the crime scenes. He faced trial a decade later and pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison and will be eligible for parole after serving 50 years, when he's 101 years old. Number 3. 26-year-old Thiago Deoka is considered to be one of the worst serial killers of the modern era, and he, just like Hobbs, was employed as a security guard, but he committed his crimes in his home country of Brazil. Deoka was born in 1988, and according to him, he had a tough childhood, as he was regularly assaulted by a neighbor. He would claim that the assaults took place over several years, but it remains unknown whether he ever reported the man to the police or his family. He would go on to blame this for the crimes he committed later on in his life, but some people believe he was born a psychopath and that he would have carried out the attacks regardless. His MO was as follows. He would get on his motorbike and cruise through the streets just looking for a victim, usually a homeless person or someone he didn't like the look of. He would then ride up to them at full speed yelling "robbery" and then produce a firearm with which he would end their life. He would never steal anything from his victims, since he was carrying out these crimes due to a feeling of unabated hatred against the world and an incessant need to end someone's life. His victims were chosen at random, as he never planned on attacking any one specific person. He managed to evade the law for a full 4 years before his crime spree came to an end in an unexpected way. He was pulled over by a police officer who noticed that his license plate was fake, and upon being questioned, he confessed to ending the lives of 39 people, most of whom were women. Deoka was eventually found guilty and sentenced to 700 years behind bars, but he'll be released after 30 thanks to a law in Brazil that stipulates that no one can be made to serve more than 3 decades in prison. Number 2. Officially, Nancy Hazel, who's also known as Nanny Doss, the Giggling Granny, and the Lonely Hearts Killer, ended the lives of 5 people, but it's suspected that she's responsible for the demise of many more. Nancy hails from Montana, and she grew up in Blue Mountain. Her parents had a contentious relationship, since her father James was a controlling man who kept his children out of school so that they could perform manual labor on their farm. As the years passed by, her mother, Louisa, started hating James, making for a very toxic home life. At the age of 7, Nancy suffered a serious brain injury while aboard a train, and she would suffer from headaches, depression, and blackouts for many years after the fact. Growing up in the environment that she did, she started fantasizing about her own romantic future and became obsessed with the Lonely Hearts column in her mother's magazines. She and her sisters were forbidden from speaking to men and from attending social gatherings, such as dances. She married a man named Charles Braggs while she was still young, and they would go on to have 4 children. But they both started affairs and would often not see each other for days on end. Charles started to fear that Nancy would end his life, and he fled. She then married another man named Frank Harrelson, with whom she lived in Jacksonville. She found out that he had a criminal record and that he was an alcoholic, but despite this, the marriage lasted for 16 years. On the 15th of September that year, though, he came home after drinking heavily and assaulted her, and she decided to end his life by lacing his whiskey with rat poison. She then took to the Lonely Hearts column, where she found her next husband, Arlie Lanning, another alcoholic and womanizer. They didn't spend much time together, and in 1950, while Nancy was visiting her sister Dovie, who was very ill, Dovie unexpectedly passed away. Later that same year, Lanning's mother passed away after she was poisoned, and after Lanning also lost his life, Nancy burned their house to the ground. She then joined a dating service where she met her 4th husband, Richard Morton. She would continue her heinous crimes in 1953 by poisoning not only Morton, but her own mother. She married Samuel Doss less than a month later. In the following year, he was admitted to a hospital after contracting what she believed was the flu. He was released after showing some improvement, but passed away just days later due to arsenic poisoning. Nancy was finally taken into custody, and she confessed that she ended his life for the insurance money. She was found guilty of ending the lives of 4 of her husbands, her sister, mother, and mother-in-law, as well as several others, and she pleaded guilty and was handed a life sentence. Number 1. When most people get married, they deliver touching wedding vows, promising to love each other forever, but Kelly and Jason Cochran were not your usual couple. On their wedding day, they made a pact that if one of them was found to be unfaithful, the other would be tasked with ending their life. Kelly's case started in 2014 when a man named Christopher Reagan suddenly disappeared without explanation. It was noted that he'd missed several shifts in his hometown of Iron River in Michigan, and this was seen as very unusual since he was a reliable and punctual worker. When he could not be located, a missing person case was opened, and during the investigation, it was discovered that he was planning on relocating to North Carolina, where he hoped to start a new life. But it also came to light that he'd been having an affair with Kelly, who was his coworker. But there was no evidence linking her to his disappearance, and his case went cold after the couple relocated to Hobart, Indiana. 2 years later, her husband Jason was found deceased in the couple's home, and initially it was believed he'd suffered an overdose of an illegal substance. But when an autopsy was performed, it was determined that his life had been ended by someone since he'd been strangled. The FBI investigated the case, and they received an anonymous tip from someone who knew the couple, and who stated that Jason and Christopher's cases might be linked. Kelly was brought in for questioning, and she would confess to having an affair with Christopher. She claimed that Jason knew about the affair and didn't object to it, but investigators disputed this. When her movements following Jason's passing were determined, it was found that she had on several occasions traveled to a certain wooded area, and one of the investigators decided to try an unusual tactic. He found a tree stump in the area and carved the phrase, "Chris is here," into it. Kelly then returned to the woods a few days later and was seen running out of the woods in a panicked state. And later that same day, she told the authorities that she needed to talk about something. She explained that Jason had ended Christopher's life with a firearm, but this was merely an effort to pin the crime on someone who could no longer defend themselves. The investigation continued, and with mounting pressure, Kelly finally decided to confess to being involved in ending Christopher's life. Kelly was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in Christopher's case. She was handed an extra 65 years for ending her husband's life, and it's suspected that she may have ended several more, but no proof of this has been found as of yet. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button, Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.